It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody, where each week we seek inspiration from great men and women to become the heroes and heroines of our own lives. And you are here with your hosts. I am Andrew Bernstein. You are Robert Begley. How you doing today, Robert?
I am fabulous, Andy, ready to celebrate the work of a man whose novels are just as relevant today as they were back in the 1940s when he first published them. And it's scary.
It's scary. You're absolutely right. But we're talking about the great Eric Blair. And if you don't know him by his birth name, you probably know him by his pen name of George Orwell. And as we go, here we go, 1984.
Oh boy, Andy. You know, when your last name is used as an adjective, Orwellian, you know you've arrived. But in this case, in today's episode, it's more negative than positive. So some themes like to talk about, Andy. We have thought crime, we have thought police, we have Ministry of Truth. Back then in the 40s and now today. Lastly is the question of technology in society. Orwell has like an advanced technology that watches everything. And there are some other dystopian works where there is no technology because it's so primitive, the lifestyle. So those are three things, but I'm sure we'll talk about other topics as we go along, Andy.
No, absolutely. And this is very fresh in my mind, because for one reason, I just gave a brief mini lecture to Students for Liberty on animal farming, but mostly because for the last month, I've been working on a very complex essay on 1984, for the Objective Standard, which I think the title of it is Orwell, 1984, and the Baleful Contemporary Similarities. So we have, there's a lot here to discuss. And should we start before we get into 1984, which will probably be the bulk of the discussion, because it's a great book. And if you haven't read it, everybody, you should read it. If you haven't read it in a while, reread it. First of all, it's a powerful novel as a literary work. It's a novel, and so we assess it as a work of literary art. It's powerful. It's not uplifting, but Orwell's theme required it to be, depressing and negative. It's a brilliant literary work, and it's politically prescient and philosophically insightful. And so I would say definitely read or reread 1984. It's so relevant today. But shall we start, Robert, at the beginning with his birth in India?
Yeah, let's talk about Orwell himself. His as you said, Eric Arthur Blair, dates are 1903 to 1950. And one sad thing is 1984 came out in 1948, 49, I think. So only 1 year before he died.
And he died in January of 1950.
Yeah.
So he didn't get to savor, the rewards of his great efforts, sadly.
Yeah.
But hopefully he knew in here what he had accomplished.
That's right. Yeah. So British born, lived his the better part of his life in the I think what we call the Midlands of the UK. Essayist, novelist, critic of contemporary politics, and Shakespeare was definitely one of his heroes as a kid. And actually, let me correct myself. I said born in India.
Yeah, he's born in India.
In British controlled India. So, and Andy, he reminds. I think of Kipling as well, who was born in South Africa, and they're like British controlled parts of these countries where the education system of the British is good enough so you get these real brilliant thinkers, even in these places which are far away from the UK.
Yeah, Yeah, Kipling, as I recall, is a great writer, great poet, was a supporter of British imperialism, if I recall correctly. I don't think Orwell was, but
No, probably not.
yeah, but I'm just guessing here. But anyhow, yeah, born in in India, which is a British possession. Then spent some time. One thing that's really relevant to 1984 is the time he spent in Spain in the 1930s fighting in the Spanish Civil War. Right?
Yeah.
He was wounded there, and obviously was fighting against the nationalists, against the fascists, on the side of the loyalists, the Republican side. I mean, everything I've read about the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War it seems like it was permeated with communists. So, Hemingway noted that. Orwell, Arthur Koestler, famous novel "Darkness at Noon," which Orwell I think reviewed. They were all in Spain, either were fighting on the loyalist side, and or Hemingway as a reporter, obviously his sympathies with them. But Orwell, let's put this way: Orwell knew communists firsthand, and it was not a pleasant experience for him, was it?
No. Let's stick with Orwell here, and so he's a writer. He wants to put his money where his mouth is, right? He goes to Spain during this war, and he starts writing. He's getting published, and the first novel that I think really put him on the map, as you mentioned, was Animal Farm.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, what does he do? He breaks down his view of human nature is not very high because there's sheep, dogs, and pigs, right? As the the archetypes.
4 legs good, 2 legs bad, right? The sheep keep bleeding.
4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Yeah. And this
think about Animal Farm is it's a biting satire on the Bolshevik Revolution and the establishment of the Soviet state. And Orwell, well aware, that was what, 1943 when he published it. Again, his experience with the communists in the 1930s in the Spanish Civil War, he knew that the communists in Spain were controlled by Stalin. They were controlled from Moscow. And that was the truth with communist parties in a number of countries. And Orwell was infuriated with Western intellectuals who thought that Soviet communism was a benign experiment. He realized this was a totalitarian state, and that's why he wrote Animal Farm, to show the totalitarian nature of communism. The bad news, Robert and everybody, is since he was himself a democratic socialist and was not a supporter of capitalism, with the end of Animal Farm, the pigs, the leaders of the animals have reverted to all these human characteristics that the animals had originally forsworn. They're drinking, smoking, gambling,
right.
lording it over the other animals, right? The new motto is all animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And they're indistinguishable from the humans, by the end, which Orwell saying the leaders of the Soviet Union are as, what's Marx's favorite, oppressive. The leaders of the Soviet Union are as oppressive as the capitalists are. So, he doesn't see the virtues of capitalism, but he does see the evils he does see very clearly that communism is a form of totalitarianism, indistinguishable from National Socialism and fascism. And he's very annoyed at Western intellectuals for thinking that communism is somehow different or better than fascism. It isn't. Orwell's very clear.
Yeah. Yeah, and Andy, even if we look at the historical context, okay, this is now the 1940s. So the Western world is under threat from, and even the Eastern world, if we look at imperialist Japan. But these dictatorships, these fascist and communist dictatorships, are essentially, they're trying to take over. And Orwell sees that and writes a critique of it to that effect in his Animal Farm. It definitely gains him notoriety. My personal remembrance of that was there's a Pink Floyd album called animals, and those are the three main characters. You know, the pigs, the sheep, and the dogs. And it's like, if that's the best you have about what, you know, how about the humans who are actually honest and productive and creative, and you know, they should have a place here. But in Orwell's universe, you know, which we can even move on to 1984, sadly, that's not the case. There isn't that focus on
the humans are untrustworthy. And you know, in animal form, they represent the capitalists. They're untrustworthy. They are bad guys. You know, Orwell thinks, I think Marx is right about that. But he's waving a big red flag at the red, you know, well, actually at Western intellectuals. The communists are just as bad, you know. You know, so for me as a supporter of capitalism, I'm shaking my ass.
Yes.
The communists and the Nazis are really evil, Mr. Orwell. The capitalists may have their flaws, but they have a number of great virtues as well. But anyhow, you know, that's Orwell. That's Orwell's view. So he's definitely anti-communist. He's not pro-capitalist, but he's definitely anti-communist.
Yeah. And so again, he takes this exact theme further in his next novel, 1984. And Andy, I'll just say one thing. Some of my earliest memories, way before I started reading books, and definitely before I read 1984, in my household, my mother, there was an expression, Big Brother is watching you. And I had no clue who Big Brother was until, well, an older sibling explained it to me. But then when I read the book, I was like, yeah, that is scary, that someone is watching you at all times. And
especially if it's a government that has the power to arrest you, incarcerate you, exile you, execute you, or whatever.
And especially nowadays, even if they have the technology to watch you and take action against you, which is the scary part, and the relevancy in today's culture of this novel. But let's
and we should just point out briefly here how many of Orwell's formulations have simply become part of the language. You know, Orwell carved out these conceptual tools that enable us to analyze political issues at a deeper level. Big Brother is watching. I mean, that's the first thing that came to my mind in June of 2013, when Edward Snowden shocked the nation that, you know, with his revelations that the U.S. government is spying on innocent Americans, not just Americans who there may be some evidence that they're guilty of criminal activities, but you and me, you know, innocent Americans by the millions. That's the first thing that came to my mind. Big Brother is watching. I mean, Orwell gave us a whole bunch of these conceptual tools. And one today, what was the last April, when the Biden administration announced they were establishing a governance board of disinformation at Homeland Security. First thing, me and a lot of other people, probably you and a lot of others, we shouted out Ministry of Truth. All of this and a lot more from Orwell. So
and Newspeak. How different is today's mainstream media from what he calls Newspeak? Okay, and we covered Peter Beckman in a prior episode, and he would jokingly call Newsweek, he would rename it Newspeak, and because it just toted these platitudes that are just in the jargon of propaganda. It's just simple propaganda. There's no investigative journalism. There's no factual, detailed reporting. It's just all this slanted bias. And Orwell just captures it so well, Andy, in the novel. And how about we give a couple of concretes here? Spoiler alert, you got to read these. As Andy said, I mean, it is fabulous. And I'll even say there's a good film of 1984 as well, but never judge a film by its book. So read the book first, okay?
Yeah, spoiler alert, everybody. If you haven't read 1984, come back to this show and first read it. But go ahead, Robert. What were you going to say about 1984?
Well, the show, again, tying it into this idea of what we call thought police, thought crimes, and this Ministry of Truth within the novel. there's this oppressive vibe, and the main character, Winston Smith, we feel for him. We see him being suffocated, and only he can get out periodically and be on his own and think. And there's a romance involved as well. But can you trust anybody? That's one of the saddest aspects of the novel, is that you can't trust anyone. And just as you said, Andy, same thing. There's a historical basis in the novel where these different warring countries are warring with each other. And what's Winston's job? It's basically erasing, rewriting history, right, Andy?
Mhm.
I mean, what kind of job is that?
It's an intellectually fraudulent one. I mean, that's for sure. Your adjective of suffocating is perfect. That's the atmosphere in 1984, is that the party, the communists are referred to as the party. The party is ubiquitous. They have their two-way telescreens, that they're watching you, they're listening to you. It's a suffocating atmosphere. And the truth is not necessarily, to put it mildly, truth is not necessarily that which is supported by evidence. Truth is that which is congruent with the party propaganda. And so, that's why they have the Ministry of Truth that's Winston Smith is one. There's hundreds, maybe thousands of people rewriting history to be congruent, to be suitable for party propaganda. And the girlfriend that Winston meets, Julia, who's my favorite character in the story. Her job at the Ministry of Truth is to rewrite the great literary works of the past, Chaucer, Milton, Shakespeare, to make their work, their writings, and their themes, compatible with the propaganda of the party. So you're rewriting the great literary works of the past. Everything is party propaganda, and it's impossible in most cases, impossible to learn the truth as it was or is in reality, as distinct from truth as that which the party propaganda indoctrinates us with. So it's a suffocating atmosphere. And you're penalized with death. You're killed. You're executed if you stand up and contradict any of the propaganda.
One of the quotes we mentioned, so many of Orwell's statements are staples in society. In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And that's what Winston Smith wants to do in the novel. He actually wants to tell the truth, and it's a revolutionary act, and he pays a price. He pays
he does
price for it.
Yes. I mean, let's discuss Winston and Julia for a minute. Because Winston is a sort of an intellectual. He wants to rebel. He has some vague yearnings for freedom. So 2 thumbs up for Winston Smith. Julia, on the other, he's 39, she's 26, pretty girl, smart, obviously, but she's not that interested in politics. She says, it's a great line in the book where she says to him, "The news is all lies anyway." She said, "Well, you said, what knows the news is all lies?" I said, wow, that's published in 1949. But certainly true today. But she rebels at a much more personal level. The party has this anti-sex league. They're almost like Puritans, because you're supposed to just be in love with the party. Romantic love is eschewed, for the upper classes, for the party members. But Julia takes lovers, and when secretly, it's very dangerous what she's doing. And Winston Smith asks her, "If you enjoy sex," and she says, "I adore it." She says, and I think I think she and Winston actually love each other, but she's not interested in politics. She rebels at this very personal level. And he says to her at one point in the story, "You're only a revolutionary from the waist down," which is a great line. Which is a great line. But I love this about Julia, is that she what's freedom for? We want freedom in order to pursue personal values, and romantic love is a huge. Have a personal life, have privacy. to have love, your personal values. That's what we want. Freedom. Winston Smith's a little more intellectual. He's more in the abstract. But Julia gets there, the very personal level. This is what freedom is for. And the privacy to choose your own lover, to choose the person you love, and then the privacy to make love, personal value. She gets it. So that's why she's my favorite character. And,
Andy.
Well, there's one last thing.
Yeah.
And you mentioned how Winston Smith pays the price for his rebelliousness. They both do. At the end, they're still alive. They're probably going to be executed at some point by the state. But at the end, there's, Julia has after they've been tortured and everything, but I say Julia has a scar on her forehead. Winston Smith notices, hinting that the state probably lobotomized her.
Yeah.
That she was such a fervent revolutionary. She was so undisciplinable, if I could coin a word. She could not be regimented by any other means, and they probably had to lobotomize. Again, something else I love about her is her defiantly independent spirit.
The feistiness, Andy, that you and I personally, that's our type of woman, right?
Oh yeah, without a
someone
doubt.
who's feisty and of course has a good mind-body integration, and sex is way up there as far as like a cardinal virtue in their life. Coming back to the suffocation theme, even at the height of the joy that they're having when they're just together by themselves, thinking they're not being watched, the narration tells you Winston knows this is not going to last. He knows it's doomed, and they both somewhat know that it's doomed. Yeah. So in that sense, let's at least just try to enjoy it. Let's let's play this out as far as we can until doomsday.
Right. They say to each other, "We are the dead." They know they're going to get caught at some point. That a revolution, if it's going to come at all, is many years in the future. So they're going to get caught and probably executed by the state. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Let's live while we can.
Yeah.
Live in love.
Yeah. So just
live in love while we can.
That's right. So this idea of trust, Winston trusts O'Brien. Okay, he's giving him opening up to him, and then of course this comes back, and to me that these are the most intellectually powerful scenes, because O'Brien's saying, right, he's giving the philosophy of the party, of essentially of a totalitarian state. And he constantly quizzes Winston, and something the general public would know: 2 + 2 equals.
Whatever the party says it does.
Yeah, but objectively, we know it's 4. But when that is questioned to what the party is, you have either objective reality on one hand, or you have the party, the brute force of the party on the other hand. That's a powerful theme.
Complete subjectivism. Yeah. That is, truth is whatever the ruling power says it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way that, so Winston, Andy, the two of them, Winston and Julie, they're kind of the height, but what Orwell does is he shows on every level, one of Winston's co-workers, a poor guy, is also in the prison cell next to him, and he's saying, "My daughter, I in my dreams, I shouted out something, against the party." And
he said in his sleep, he shouted down with Big Brother. His daughter was spying at the keyhole in the bedroom. 7 years old. He's proud of her. He said, "Oh, she went off to the, I must have done a good job raising her." Orwell's great, showing how the kids spy on their parents and how horrible it is. And by the way, Robin, not that many years later, after Orwell published this, the East German secret police, the Stasi, put this into practice. Yeah. They didn't have the technology for the two-way, thought screens, but they have. What was it? It's in my essay on 1984 that I'm writing. I think the population of East Germany was 16 million, which is small. They had the Stasi, the secret police, had something like
big percentage.
Yeah, there's something like 100,000, agents, but they had like I think it was 173,000 informants amongst the civilian population. Now, out of 16 million, that's that's what that's
It's a
what is
big
that?
number.
What is that? What
Yeah.
does that come to? That's like one in fewer than 100. Yeah. Be generous. 1 in 100 people
Yeah.
on average is is an informant for state security. So even if you're somewhat shy and only we know hundreds of people, right?
Yeah.
Friends, neighbors, colleagues, people we meet in stores, people who work in restaurants and stuff. That means even if we know only 500 people in our lives, that means on average, 5 of them are informants, just itching for the chance to go to the secret police and inform on us, and that was dragged off to the gulag or whatever the secret police are going to do to us. Well, and children especially. Taught by the East German communists to spy on their parents. And by the way, what's the name of that movie? The Lives of Other People, or
The Lives of Others.
Yeah, The Lives of Others, which I think we can recommend. Very good,
Yes.
showing what the East German secret police, the Stasi, look like in action.
Talk about oppressive, right?
Yeah.
That is
Right.
that is really a well done film on the same theme. So,
And the Stasi put into practice, without the technology, but they put into practice the oppressive, the suffocating aspect of constant surveillance, constant state surveillance on innocent people. Exactly what Orwell had predicted that communism will do.
So one of the lines, while O'Brien is basically hammering Winston Smith, I'll just read one quote here that jumps out at me. There's so many during this climax of the novel. He says, "Shall I tell you why you were brought here? To cure you." Okay, to cure. Don't we hear this today? Do we hear this in today's culture? To cure, wow, I want to make you sane. Will you understand, Winston, that no one whom we bring to this place ever has been uncured, like it's you come in here, you're going to walk out cured, just like the way you said, we're either going to do it this way, we're going to do it this way, or we're going to break you spiritually or physically,
Right.
And it's so it's the power of brute force, where objective reality is out the window, and Winston's, he's numb. He's numb at this point to the onslaught of this overpowering state.
No, absolutely. And to your point about curing us, shortly after the 2020 presidential election, there was a member of the Democratic National Committee from California, I don't remember his name offhand, but said that Democrats now must think in terms of post-World War II denazification programs in Germany, where the Allies, denazified, the country, and we have to in effect denazify Trump supporters, and that means re-education camps, and so on, and so forth. So you're absolutely right. How brazen it's getting in our society today, the push towards communism
and erasing the past, which is what Winston's job was, basically erasing it out, which we see sadly again in today's culture, where whether it's taking down statues, even a bad guy, Robert E. Lee, I consider a bad guy, but statue should stay there because it's a statement of American history. Teddy Roosevelt as well, we talked about him. This is part of how we got to where we are today, and by erasing that, not only are you likely to repeat it, you're probably going to repeat the problems to the nth degree worse.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right, Robert. And if we take down the statues and try to erase the history of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, because they were slave owners, which they were, and we properly condemn them. But if we're going to erase the history, then we're erasing all the tremendous virtues. George Washington leading, the Continental Army War of Independence, Madison writing the main writer of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, Jefferson, main writer of the Declaration of Independence. We're throwing away a lot of virtue because of their flaws and their moral failings. So no, you're right. That's not the way to do it. Obviously, in a free country, the way to do is teach history in its full, teach the full history of the country, the good and the bad. And there's bad. Slavery is horrible. There is bad, but there's a lot of good here that also has to be acknowledged if we are to teach the history fully and honestly. So you're right.
Yeah, well, take a break here.
The past. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Don't erase the past. Learn from it. Okay. There's those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. I mean, that's why that's a great expression.
Great line from the philosopher George Santayana at Harvard University.
So I'll just say you're watching the Hero Show brought to you by the Objective Standard Institute, and come to our website because we have a lot of exciting activities going on. Conference in Phoenix coming up. We have courses, a reading group. Andy's going to be leading We the Living, Ayn Rand's first novel, We the Living. That starts in February. A course on integration, Ayn Rand and other thinkers. Both Andy and I will be participating in that. John Hersey has a writing course. Craig Biddle has super systems. So just objectivestandard.org. You can find out everything that's going on there. I want to touch a little bit more on the idea of technology in the novel. So in 1984, I read in high school, by the way, 1984 and Brave New World, they were both required reading. And guess what? On my own, I found this book called Anthem by Ayn Rand, thanks to my favorite rock band, Rush. And I remember bringing that book into class and telling the teacher, wow, this is also futuristic and it's kind of dystopian and we should read this. And she looked at it and she's like, that will never be read in my classroom. Whoa, that was like my first ever interaction with someone who totally despised Ayn Rand. Right. But one of the analyses that I remember in Anthem is that it's a futuristic society, but there's no technology. I mean, they celebrate the discovery or invention of a candle. I mean, that's how primitive this is. Whereas 1984, there is technology. And I just wanted to unpack this theme, the role of technology in dystopian works, and then even we can talk about in present day culture as well, role of technology there.
Yeah, again, that's an interesting point. And for people who haven't read Atlas Shrugged, and again, I strongly recommend that you do. The theme there is how the mind is the mankind's means of survival. The mind is the rational thinking is how we, learn how to grow crops, or cure diseases, build homes, or invent the computers and the internet, and so on and so forth. Invent two-way telescreens, if they existed. And so, but the mind requires individual rights. The mind requires political, economic freedom, because under any type of dictatorship, religious or secular, Nazi or communist, military or civilian, the only thinking that you're permitted to, you can think what you want. The dictator can't get his hands inside your brain and change your thinking. But the only thinking you can espouse or act on is that which is congruent with the dictator's decrees. So the independent mind is severely curtailed. So you look at the examples, Galileo, threatened with torture by the Inquisition. And, there's so many, there's Socrates executed for disagreeing with the state. There's so many examples. The great minds are suppressed under any type of dictatorship. You need individual rights, you need freedom. And then you have this outpouring of advances in every field. And so you look at the freest countries of history, they're the ones with the greatest advances. In the United States, late 19th century, I called it the inventive period in the Capitalist Manifesto, for example, Edison, and the electric light, and Bell, and the telephone, and just any number of advances in every field. Well, Ayn Rand, looking at history, notices that there was a dark age. Well, what happened? the Greeks and the Romans had made great advances, and then Christianity suppressed many of those advances. They
Tried
shut
to
down.
erase it, right,
Yeah.
Andy? We could say they tried to, they did an Orwell before Orwell.
Yeah. In fact, there's a new book out, Robert. I think the author, Catherine Nixie, is that her name? I haven't read it yet. I forget the title offhand, but very scholarly work on how the Catholic Church suppressed some of the great advances of classical civilization.
Hmm.
And Charles Freeman had written on this previously. It was The Closing of the Western Mind, which
That's right. Yes.
yeah, which I've read, and again is very interesting. But the Catholic Church shut down the pagan schools of philosophy. They prohibited any pagans from teaching. They burned books. They burned a great deal of Sappho's writings. They murdered Hypatia. We did a show on that. They suppressed free thinking. You had to agree with the church dictates. They burned heretics at the stake. Any deviation from church dictates was severely punished. And what happened? The world, or the Western world anyway, sank into a real dark age. And well, I think Ayn Rand is saying that the modern collectivists, whether they're communists or national socialists, they're at least as bad as the Catholic Church. I would say worse. But Ayn Rand showed that they're at least as bad, and they will suppress independent thinking at least as severely. And then if you have a collectivist world, communist, fascist, or some hybrid of the two, over a period of time, all the advances of the past will be lost, just like in the first dark age. So she's projecting a second dark age. Yeah. Now, Orwell, interestingly, he's projecting a total, a world where there's no capitalism, there's no individual rights. It's just one communist state, let's say. In time, I don't know how long, century, 2 centuries, whatever, you lose the advances of the past. Now, Orwell's projecting such a world, but it's only like 30 years of communism. So I wonder if there's a time difference here. But anyway, Orwell's projecting a world in which advanced technology is compatible with repressive politics, which Ayn Rand certainly disagrees with. But there may simply be a time difference. Winston Smith is thinking about, in the past, on the capitalist past, the party propaganda is the party invented the airplane. He knows that's false. He can't say it. But he knows there were advances in the past. And I wonder if the technology that the party is using comes from the past. It's 30 years or so since. Hasn't been enough time for the repressiveness,
right?
To simply kill off all free thinkers. They're on their way to doing it. Winston Smith says Syme, right? The linguist, who's explaining to him how Newspeak works. And Winston Smith thinks to himself, Syme is too smart. The party doesn't like, even though he's loyal to the party, he's too intelligent. The party doesn't like that kind of intelligence. They fear it. Syme's going to be vaporized. He's going to be killed. So maybe there hasn't been enough time to wipe out the independent thinkers yet. When they do, the ability to use the technology, maintain it, repair it, whatever, invent, make new inventions to go further, that'll disappear. So I don't know that there's a complete disagreement on this, but I'm speculating. Orwell thinks, we could say this, Orwell thinks that advanced technology is compatible with totalitarianism. He shows that in 1984. Ayn Rand in Anthem says, no, it isn't. So there is a major difference.
That is the difference. But Andy, the point that you said that I really like is that in Ayn Rand's Anthem, those were the unmentionable times, and there were generations and generations in the past, okay? Whereas Orwell, it's within one time frame, because there's that older guy that he's asking stories. What were things like back in the day? And so it is only it's 1984. So even if we look at the title, it's not that far from the 40s, 40 something years.
Yeah, and the nuclear war that destroyed the world was in the 1950s. So it's like 30 years. Yeah. It was like 30 years of a one world totalitarianism.
Yeah.
But I just want to say one more thing about Ayn Rand and Orwell. I think of 1984 more in comparison to Ayn Rand's We the Living than Anthem. Because In Anthem, Ayn Rand's theme is very positive. It's about the rediscovery of the word I, the rediscovery of egoism. And so it's an uplifting theme and lends itself to a very positive ending, that, what's his name, Equality, later on Prometheus, rediscovered, makes these tremendous internal advances, and that enables him in the outside world to make the tremendous practical advances. And the book has a happy ending. Whereas in We the Living and 1984 it does not, because the theme of Rand's theme in We the Living and Orwell's theme in 1984 is the evils of communism, or the evils of collectivism, or the evils of totalitarianism. And in order to fully drive home those evils, the main characters have to be crushed in one form or another by the totalitarian state. So the theme in We the Living and 1984, very similar, necessitates a very depressing and unhappy ending. Whereas the theme in Anthem, much more positive, much more uplifting. Ayn Rand showing the panacea to collectivism in Anthem, that is egoism and individualism, and consequently the good guys need to triumph to show that this is the panacea. So it's interesting with these great writers. Your theme necessitates certain plot developments, and
you're right.
But the similarity, the leitmotif that runs through all of them is collectivism is evil, and this is written in the 20th century, where collectivism was swallowing up the world. So both these writers writing those books, We the Living and Anthem, both published in the 1930s. And 1984 in 1949, during the run-up to World War II, or the aftermath of World War II, and the beginning of the Cold War, two different forms of collectivist totalitarianism versus freedom. These books were very timely, and Orwell fortunately was widely acknowledged. Ayn Rand, who, as you pointed out in your anecdote, is unfortunately not as widely accepted by the intelligentsia.
No, but Andy, I mean, it's a good segue. We could wrap this up. What we're looking forward to going through We the Living with you, 1984. Looking forward to reading what you write about. I think one of the main points now, if we just stay in the world of literature, the incredible power that the incredible emotional ride one goes through with a great work of literature. It's like in those two novels, I don't want to be there. I don't want to be Winston Smith, but I like reading about him, because it is really, that's what literature can do. And Orwell was a master. He was just a master at that. I'm talking to a guy who's, taught literature, knows it, the subject inside out. But that's my closing thought on Orwell.
You're right. The power of art generally, the power of and literary art in particular, because it integrates reason with emotion. It has that power. Whereas if Orwell had written an essay or a nonfiction book on the evils of collectivism, given what he showed us in 1984, it would have been very insightful, and it would have been very, informative. But it wouldn't have the emotional wallop of 1984, because here you're dramatizing, people's lives in action, and you get caught up in their feelings and their lovemaking and their fear of Big Brother and everything. And the story just integrates your rational understanding with your emotional awareness, your feelings, for these people caught in this suffocating trap. And that's the power and glory of art, the integration of reason and emotion, and why I've long thought that the best, as a philosophy teacher, philosophy professor, the best way to teach philosophy is through great literature. For exactly that reason. Yeah.
Well, to the man, sadly he didn't get to see his his work become world renowned, which we do, even if it's negative. He created a great work of art, and he should have profited financially from it, if nothing else. If nothing else, he should have made a zillion bucks.
Well, yes, he should. I think we could salute the great man, Robert, and say thank you, Mr. Orwell, for enlightening, us. First of all, giving us this great story. Second of all, providing these conceptual tools by means of which to more trenchantly analyze political issues and political problems. So thank you very much. Let me close. My last remark, Robert, is may the world heed you warned us, Mr.
Yes.
Orwell. May the best members of human society heed your warnings, closely and carefully.
You won't be erased as long as there's shows like the Hero Show celebrating you. I'll just close on that myself.
Exactly right. So we will be back, everybody. We'll be back next week on the Hero Show to celebrate more, further great men and women seeking inspiration to be the heroes and heroines of our own lives. So we'll see you next week, everybody.